Hello, everybody. Ready to start this week's lesson. Going to be reading out of 1 Kings, chapter 17, verses 17 through 24. I'm a little bit behind tonight. I had to go out of town due to a death in the family, and then some things been busy with my grandson's birthday party all afternoon, and my daughter's water heater blew up, so she has water everywhere in her house. So she's here with us for a day or two, probably. So bear with me tonight, if you would. Say an extra prayer for this lesson. But again, I teach Sunday school at Falmouth Baptist Church in Falmouth, Kentucky, and been doing these lessons now on Facebook Live and now on YouTube for a year and a half, thereabouts. So just appreciate you joining in. I always like to start with a word of prayer. So if you would, just bow with me and we'll have a word of prayer, and then we'll get started with today's lesson. So, dear Lord, just again, thank you for allowing us to be together virtually, Father. And Father, I just lift up those that are going through difficult times, those that have lost loved ones, those in my family, Lord, that have lost their mother. Lord, just pray that you, well, I know you'll be there for them. I just pray that they turn to you for comfort. I pray that all those who are going through difficult days turn to you for comfort, that you're there. We don't need to pray and ask you to come and be with us. You're there. We just need to turn to you. Father, just during this time, I just pray that your Spirit would guide this lesson, would speak to our hearts. Father, I especially lift up those that are lost and just pray, Lord, that they would hear your call, that they would feel your Spirit speaking to them, and they would respond. Father, we just ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Again, like I said, we're reading out of 1 Kings. The title of the lesson is Serve Through Prayer. The point of the lesson is serve those around you through consistent prayer. Question in the materials this week was, when have you seen a group or community turn to prayer for a significant need? And I can think of a lot of things over the year. I think over the years, even on Facebook or YouTube or wherever, Facebook, social media, people calling for folks to pray for this person or that person or needs in their own lives, and a lot of people will respond that they're praying, and that we do reach out when we have needs to others and ask for prayer. People with medical needs, financial needs. One of the first things that came to my mind was for older folks was back with 9/11, and I remember our country. All the politicians even prayed, and they'd gather on the Capitol steps and sing "God Bless America." They didn't want God any other time, but they were there getting their political brownie points, I guess. I shouldn't be judgmental, but sorry, that's just my opinion. You may disagree, and feel free to do so. But during that time, it seemed like there was an outcry, or a calling and a desire to pray, to turn to God, and to seek God's help. Some background again for our materials today. Again, we're studying Elijah. I have been the last couple weeks and continuing on for a few weeks. And those that you have been with me, you know what we've covered so far. Those that you haven't, check out the videos. But just Reader's Digest version, God had sent Elijah to do some things. When he called him to be a prophet, our first lesson, he sent him to prophesy to King Ahab and tell him how the drought was coming. And then the next week, our lesson we discussed, God told Elijah to leave, to go to the Wadi Kerith, where he would take care of him, to withdraw, and he would provide him food and water and sustenance during his time. Then he directed Elijah to go to see a widow in the midst of a pagan land. And this was a lady that was starving to death. Her and her son were starving to death, and Elijah went and there was a miracle where food and bread and water were provided. Oil was provided for the bread. So God is sending Elijah, and each step along the way, he's growing him with different miracles. So, in each step of the way, he's using Elijah, and as I say, he's growing Elijah. So God had been using Elijah up to this point to teach the widow and her son to rely on him each and every day. We talked about last week with the bread and the oil, that each day they would go and there'd be enough bread or enough flour and enough oil to make bread that they could could have sustenance for that day, and they had to go each and every day to rely on God. And so God had been providing for them daily. But and you know, he does that to us, for us. But you know, God was not setting them up to have an endless carefree life. Even though he was providing and promised provision and providing the provisions, it was no promise that everything was always going to be easy. And that's sometimes, you know, something that we go through. You know, we think, and a lot of people think, well, if you accept Christ and you're a Christian, you know, God's going to take care of you. Everything's going to be easy. Well, life is not easy. And God doesn't promise that it's always going to be easy. But here, this woman, things had happened, you know, been going good, and in the midst of all of God's blessings for her, you know, disaster blindsides her. And that's where we're going to pick up and read the verses. Again, 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 17 through 24. After this, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. His illness got worse until he stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "Man of God, what do you have against me? Have you come to call attention to my iniquity so that my son is put to death?" But Elijah said to her, "Give me your son." So he took him from her arms, brought him up to the upstairs room where he was staying, and laid him on his own bed. Then he cried out to the Lord and said, "Lord my God, have you also brought tragedy on the widow I am staying with by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself out over the boy 3 times. He cried out to the Lord and said, "Lord my God, please let this boy's life come into him again." So the Lord listened to Elijah, and the boy's life came into him again, and he lived. Then Elijah took the boy, brought him down from the upstairs room to the house, and gave him to his mother. Elijah said, "Look, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know you are a man of God, and the Lord's word from your mouth is true." So like I say, you know, God had been providing daily for them by providing the food during the midst of this drought and sustenance. And now, as I say, the woman's blindsided. It says the boy suddenly fell ill, the son. I don't know how it was, but he fell ill, and his illness continued to get worse until he stopped breathing, and he died. You know, as I was reading that, I thought of all the things with COVID. It wasn't COVID, but, you know, just the respiratory problems that accompany COVID and so forth, and how sometimes it has set upon people so quickly, and they're gone so fast. Well, that's what happened to this boy. And with this son, you know, it's like a double blow to this woman. You know, she's lost her son. Obviously, that's a blow to her and to her spirit. But if you'll think back when we talked about it a little bit last week, a widow was in a rather precarious position in that day and age. And, you know, her son was likely, you know, where she was looking to him to provide for her in the future in her old age. You know, he was going to be the provision for her. So now even her future is in jeopardy because her son is dead. So she's lost her son, which is a, you know, terrible thing. And then she's also lost potentially her future, her own future. And the woman does what we do a lot of times when things don't go our way, when we have troubles. She lashes out bitterly against Elijah and says, "Man of God, what do you have against me?" Do we sometimes not lash out against God when we don't understand, when things bad happen to us, and wondering, you know, God, why do you do this? Why'd you let this happen? You know, I've heard a lot of times, I know when I was in New York after 9/11, they even had pamphlets, you know, why does God let bad things happen to good people? Well, you still see it. I see it on Facebook when something happens. A friend of mine who is an atheist, you know, sometimes post, why does God let that happen to his people if he loves them? You know, it's one of those things you hear, but, you know, that's what this woman does. She's sort of lost, you know, all sense of reason, all sense of rational thought. And, you know, and you know, it's kind of interesting if you go back and read the verses before the story when she thought they were going to run out of bread and oil and food. You know, she said, basically told Elijah, "I'm going to go home, bake me some bread, and my son and I are going to eat it, and then we're going to die." And she was just matter of fact and calm about it. Well, after sort of recovering and living the good life, not the good life, but, you know, living and having sustenance and thinking, "Oh man, I got through that." Now, instead of acting calm, you know, she's surprised by her son's death, surprised that this had happened. And it says she lashes out at Elijah. She recognizes him as a man of God. And then she starts questioning. And, she says, what does God have against me? What did I do to cause this? She started blaming herself. Maybe she was blaming herself on, her husband had died. Maybe she was starting to blame herself for everything that had gone wrong in her life. And again, don't we sometimes do that when things are not going the way we want or things are going difficult? Do we sometimes sort of start thinking, what did I do that caused this? What did I do? What have I done to create this problem? And you start looking back on all your problems. You start just beating yourself down and wondering about it. And, she says, what have I done that causes? Why is God, judging me by killing my son? She let all of her problems take over her thinking. And she started beginning to blame herself for all of the problems. You just let her difficulties. Like I say, when she thought she was going to die, and knew she was going to die, she was rather calm. I'm sure she didn't like it, but she knew it was going to happen. And she sort of accepted the inevitability of it. But when she was surprised by it, when it came out of the blue, she turned bitter, And sometimes we tend to forget the necessity of suffering. Going through life without difficulties never gives us the conditions that are necessary in order to grow in faith. If you never go through any problems, you're not going to grow in your faith until you see God working through those difficulties in your life. You see God working in your lives and in the lives of others that are going through difficult times. If everything's just real easy and so forth, you just never grow. We're going to go through difficult days. It happens. It's part of life. God never promises that it's going to be just a bed of roses. And, like I say, this woman's, she's upset. She's lashing out. But Elijah, in the midst of all of her anger, is about to, show her real faith in God. As we move into the next set of verses, in verse 19, he just looks at her and says, give me your son. Just give me your son. Nothing he could say was going to appease her. Nothing was going to ease her pain. Nothing was going to make her understand. He couldn't just talk to him. I've been through chaplaincy training. One of the things they tell us and taught us when you're going through that kind of training, when people are suffering, is don't sit there and say, oh, I know how you feel, and try to talk with them about it. But instead, listen to what they have to say. Listen to them and let them talk their way through things. Elijah just says, give me your son. Give me your son. He took her burden, the burden of her loss, and put it upon himself. He said, give me your son. I'll take this burden from you. And he took the boy and went upstairs to where he was staying, to his room. And, when I read that, I thought, well, he's living in the room upstairs in the 2-story house. Well, actually, in that culture, obviously to give him some privacy and also to protect the widow's reputation, that what this room would have actually been up on the roof, some sort of temporary shelter on the roof of the building that she lived in, was where he went. So he took the child upstairs, and then he, as I say, he takes action. He says, he cried out to God, and he says, God, why? Why did this happen? Now, it's kind of interesting, he has questions for God, and it's okay to have questions for God. We sometimes think we shouldn't question God. Well, we shouldn't question God, but it's okay to have questions for God. So there's a distinction there. It's okay to have questions for God. It's not okay to question God, to question his motives. God wants us to talk to him about the things that we don't understand, what our concerns are. He's very candid, Elijah is, with his concerns to God. He says, what's the purpose of this death, God? I don't understand. I don't know. Will you tell me? He doesn't question God and say, why'd you do this? What were you thinking, God? It was more of, God, why'd you do this? What's the reasoning behind this? He didn't know why it happened the way it did. Maybe he was even thinking he's partially at fault because here he came into their lives. Who knows what he was thinking? But he says, God, I don't understand. I don't know why you did this. But he knew he could go to God with those concerns without fully knowing God's promises and purposes, or rather not, he knew his promise, without knowing God's purposes, he could still go to him. And so then, as I said, he took action in verse 21. And what he was about to do took tremendous faith on his part, because he says, God, I don't know why you did this, but why did you let this boy die? And it says he stretched himself out on the dead boy 3 times. We don't know why 3 times. There's nothing that explains why that's significant or if it's significant. But he stretched his body out on top of the boy 3 different times. And basically, he was very burdened by this death of this boy. And he was so burdened. And again, we've got to look at that culture. As a Jew, touching that dead body, Elijah became ceremonially unclean. He was willing to become unclean because he had such a burden for this boy and for this woman that, he put aside, what would have been proper church people thing to do, and did what needed to be done. And he laid upon the boy, and he says, Lord, my God, let this boy's life come into him again. And it's really interesting. The word life in Hebrew could also be translated as soul. Let this boy's soul come back into him. He's saying, let his soul, the boy's soul had left him. He's saying, let his soul come back into him. And this is a great, demonstration of faith on Elijah's part. He had faith that God could do anything. So basically he's praying to God. He's, that's what a prayer is talking with God. And he prayed sincerely to God. He was sincere in what he was asking for. He prayed boldly to God. This is a bold request. Lord, let this boy live. Give him his life back. He's dead. Restore his life. That's a pretty bold request to ask that of God. The other thing that's interesting that he did, he prayed privately. There's a place for public prayer, but in this case, he prayed privately. It really points out to us the importance of private prayer. This was not in my materials, what I'm about to say, but something I've always sort of thought and thought was interesting about Jesus, because sometimes you go to services and someone prays and they give this long, flowery prayer, and it's 5-10 minutes long, and you think, oh, that's wonderful. And it is, and there's a place for those kinds of prayers. But I sometimes look at how Jesus prayed. Jesus, when he prayed, with his disciples, it's sort of like when he prayed in public, he prayed kind of short. When he prayed with his disciples, maybe a little longer. But look, when they said, teach us how to pray, he gives them the Lord's Prayer. How long is that prayer? How long does it take to say that prayer? But look when Jesus really went to God in prayer. Not in the public setting, but in private. That's when he really went to God. When he was in the garden, he went to spend the night in prayer. When Jesus really wanted to talk with his Father, he withdrew and prayed privately. Like I say, there's a place for public prayer, but there's a very important place for private prayer. And Elijah is praying privately. He took the boy up to his room and privately spoke to God. Last set of verses, I'm starting to run short on time. But, in response to Elijah's prayer, it says God restored the boy's life, his soul. It says his life, and again the word life, soul. His soul came into him again, and he lived. God responded to Elijah's prayer because Elijah prayed boldly, prayed sincerely, prayed having faith that God would answer it. God answered it. Then Elijah brings the boy back downstairs and just says to the woman, look, your son is alive. God had given this woman the miracle of food. He had provided food and nourishment on a daily basis for her. Again, going back to the verses prior to this, if you just read the ones before that, you'll see that story if you weren't with me last week. And now he's provided her with the miracle of her son's life. God has shown himself to this woman through Elijah. And remember the setting. This woman is in a pagan culture. She is in a culture that worshiped Baal. And and where this setting was right in the midst of that culture. He's not in Israel. He's not in amongst God's people. He's with the Baal worshipers. And the woman, her response here in verse 24 is, "Now I know you are a man of God." And she's already seen God working. But then she says, "And the word from your mouth is true." She gained through this trial in her life invaluable spiritual knowledge. Through the actions of Elijah, through the prayers of Elijah, she saw God working in Elijah's life and came to believe even more strongly. In the midst of her pagan community, through that prayer, she came to acknowledge God as the one true God. Now, this lesson is not to say God is Santa Claus, that you just go to and say, "Gimme, gimme, gimme," and God's going to give it to you. That's not the point. The point of it is that God calls us, to participate with Him to help others. Elijah took physical action to help this woman, and then that intercessory prayer, that praying for others, demonstrating, our faith in God to help others. We are to pray for others. And sometimes, when people know you're praying for them, and when that prayer is answered, it can help lead them to believe and strengthen their faith and strengthen our own faith. Like I say, that just because you ask it every time doesn't mean God's response is going to be what we want. That is not the point of this lesson. But the point is, how important prayer is, how important it is in our growth with God. I've heard it often said, prayer is not a monologue. Monologues, what the late night, I don't even call them comedians because most of them anymore aren't even funny, but the so-called late night comedians that come out, Johnny Carson used to do it and was great, would come out and he'd have that 5-minute opening or whatever where he would just sort of talk by himself. That's the monologue. Oftentimes our prayers are monologues. We just come out and we just start talking to God. We forget to take time to listen to God. Prayer should be a dialogue, a time to lay our concerns upon God, to ask God questions, not to question Him or question His motives, but to say, God, give me better understanding that I might grow, that I might learn what you have, what you're wanting me to do, or why this is happening. I don't understand, God. It's okay to ask questions of God, and He'll answer them in His timing. But, it's that dialogue, that time where we talk to God and give God a chance to talk to us, to listen to Him, to listen for His voice telling us what to do. And then the importance here of this lesson, too, is for us to praying for each other, to pray for other people and for them to pray for us, to pray together, to pray for each other. Not just for ourselves. It's important to pray for ourselves. Don't want to diminish that. But the importance of praying for other people and through their needs. Right now there's a lot of people have a lot of needs. There always is. There always is. But there are so many things going on in our world today. And COVID has just been one more thing. I hate to keep harping on that, but it just seems to be something that every time you turn around, something new coming up. But, in the difficulties that it's causing in a lot of people's lives. And, just our need to pray for each other, to pray for folks that have lost loved ones, folks that are, going through the illness, to take time and pray for them. Pray for them publicly, pray for them privately. I was at a conference years ago and they told us, they encouraged all the men there, make you a list of 4 people that you'll pray for every day. 4 people that that are lost, that you'll pray for their salvation. And I started with that list of 4. The list has grown to many people, but not all of them that I've been praying for years have been saved yet. So I can just keep praying. But there's been several that have been saved that I've prayed for. So, I have to trust God's timing. It's not easy sometimes because there's some of them that are on that list I've been praying for so hard and so long. I just want it to happen. And sometimes it's like, God, why? Why not? Why is this not happening? Is it something I'm not doing right? Or is my prayer not worthy? But I keep praying. the Southern Baptists had a thing about who's your one. Pick one person to pray for. I couldn't pick my one because I already had a list. So, the importance of praying for others. This lesson is all about prayer and demonstrating God's power in answering prayer. So, I'm out of time. I'll get this posted up to YouTube as quick as I can. Appreciate your prayers. I got a card this week from somebody that joins regularly, and it's a great encouragement to me, and I'll have to thank that person. Hopefully I'll see them tomorrow in church and thank them. But I do appreciate your prayers. I'll pray for you. Again, I always like to invite people, if you don't have a church home, Falmouth Baptist Church in Falmouth, Kentucky, corner of 4th and Maple. Sunday school Bible study starts at 9:45. We'll find a class for you. Come join us. Get there a little early. Down the fellowship hall, they have coffee and donuts, so you can come and meet and mingle if you need to, if you desire, and we'll find a place for you in a class. And then at 10:45, Brother Combe will have the message. You don't have to wear a three-piece suit, guys and ladies. You don't have to wear your Easter dresses. Just come as you are and come prepared to worship. So just pray this week that you have a good week. I pray that if you're going through difficult times that you find peace and comfort and that God answers your prayers. So Lord willing, we'll be back here next Sunday, and just God bless each of you, and have a good week, and just pray for each other.